It's worth pausing on the gap between a family memory and a government ledger. Writing earlier this month, Morgan Berry explores the problem of home through the lens of Edward Said, where belonging is sustained by memory. But that internal sense of displacement takes a colder, administrative form in a report published today by Anant Gupta. It follows a scholar in Bengal documenting the quiet scrubbing of names from official rolls. What's striking is how a literary meditation on the unhealable rift of exile finds a literal, bureaucratic counterpart in the systematic removal of names from a voter roll. One traces the poetry of loss. The other tracks the precise machinery used to strip away a citizen's rights. Writing for Public Books earlier this month, Morgan Berry traces the unhealable rift of leaving home behind. The piece moves between a rain-streaked library in Barcelona and the quiet refusal of a grandfather who visited Ireland once and never wanted to go back. Notice how Berry weighs Edward Said's academic prose against those 7 modern words to show that silence is often the most honest measure of a displaced life.
Advertisement. Dejar todo atrás debe ser lo más parecido a la muerte. Giovanni Benavides Bailón, Las palabras del aire vacío, la novela de Kafka. Barcelona, winter 2004. A young man from Massachusetts sits behind a stack of books. Rain patterns the roof of the library as darkness extends in all directions. Alone and in silence, he rubs his face. 2 years in Ecuador and 3 in Spain brought him to a place where, perceptibly and imperceptibly, the core parts of being, language, dreams, insights, and a sense of awareness had been remade in ways unexpected and at times unfamiliar. When months turn into years and years become existential questions, winter weather can bring a special kind of despair. It's a solitude that evokes loneliness, but also a distinctive form of openness to thought and ideas, to words and people, to questions and experience. As that long day journeyed into night, he turned a page and saw this. Exile is strangely compelling to think about, but terrible to experience. It is the unhealable rift forced between a human being and a native place, between the self and its true home. Its essential sadness can never be surmounted. Edward Said, Reflections on Exile. I first read those words when I was 25 years old. Hard to believe that over 2 decades later, a single paragraph can maintain the same power, force, and relevance to one's existence. Displacement is a kind of condition, one that Said acutely understood. If my exile was chosen, if it could even be called exile, Said distilled its complexity to 39 words, a way to understand silence. Reflections on Exile summoned to mind the only 7 words my grandfather ever said to me about Ireland, where he had cousins he never knew. I don't think I'll go back there, he muttered one day in the 1990s in response to my prodding. He had visited, seen family, kissed the stone, and got in a car accident. My parents said he was distracted. I wondered what Hurleys in Cork thought of how he pronounced our surname, what they thought of Puerto Rico and Martha's Vineyard, the islands where he chose to live. The reaction in their eyes and in his, the confusion wrought by exile and empire, Americanization, and the impossibility of return. 7 words linger of his story, but maybe they comprise it. Edward Said and my grandfather had different approaches to exile. One used words, the other silence.
Both were fluent in the hollowness of relocation, the inconsequence of acculturation. They had new languages and accents, lived in different climates and cities. They were surrounded by the deception of success. The jealousy, depression, confusion, and misunderstandings wrought by diaspora and imperialism were shot through their very existence. Part of Said's genius was the knowledge that it's too easy to blame empire for all of that. Places and the mind, the scars of Americanization. It's hard to think directly about identity, be it shaped by places or blood or language, especially when multiple are involved. Among the more toxic aspects of American life is the idea that family history begins in the U.S.
In my youth, no one talked about why we heard Portuguese at recess and on the bus, at the bakery and playing soccer. We never heard what happened to the Wampanoag language in a classroom half filled with Wampanoag kids, or why English is the only possible way to communicate in public. If other tongues make it into the synagogue or church, their blockage or absence in the media, in schools, and in courts long predates Donald Trump. The U.S. imperial treatment of other languages dooms their philosophies, histories, experiences, and emotions, at least in theory. In the American story, grandparents and their traditions are old world, superstitious, and not modern. You see, Jeffrey, success, or at least participation, involves abandoning all that. The surroundings say to Americanize oneself, one's words, thoughts, and maybe feelings, without regard to how scarring that concept is, without regard to what it requires of a person, of a family, without regard to how it destroys relationships, languages, friendships, and history. It also destroys people. If suicide is more common among displaced people, 7 words from William Francis Herlihy don't say how he lost his father and a brother 5 days apart. 2 Herlihy death notices arrived at once to a military outpost in the South Pacific in spring 1945. I always wondered, but never asked, which envelope he opened first. I would like to think my grandfather's silence about suicide, but also about Ireland and his first years on Martha's Vineyard, our surname meant he couldn't purchase a home, were to protect people around him. After decades of success amid Massachusetts exclusions, he eventually lived in a 2-room home on the extreme northwest corner of Puerto Rico.
Here he found happiness that was maybe impossible elsewhere, one that success and Americanization could not and did not bring. My wife says of his partiality for Aguadilla, "En Puerto Rico tu abuelo podía vivir sin que nadie le jodiera." In Puerto Rico, your grandfather could live without anyone messing with him. Almost 20 years ago, when I was hired in Mayagüez, my father helped me move. I drove the rental car to my grandparents' home, and we parked at 164 Calle E. I put the windows down. After a moment in silence, my father looked back at the hospital, then ahead toward the school. While it had been over a decade since I'd been to that spot, it was in my mind 6 months earlier as I wrote my grandfather's eulogy. Drop a clover from the shoreline of Punta Borinquen. As the tide goes out, it will float north with the Gulf Stream, pass a few miles off Martha's Vineyard, and wash up on the shores of Ireland. My grandfather's life took him on that path, from island to island to island, and now he will be laid to rest by his beloved Hope. Then, in the early phases of the sickness that would take his life, my father showed me where his parents would go to the market, their favorite place for coffee and bread, the back streets and curiosities of Aguadilla, Isabela, and Mayagüez, and the UPRM campus. These are places I now know very well, places where I play with my sons and show them what he showed me. My sons sometimes ask about our surname, about Ireland, about Massachusetts, and about their ancestors. It's hard to explain that the books available for these things are often misleading, that maps and words can't hold everything. I will tell you what I will do and what I will not do, comments James Joyce in the guise of Stephen Dedalus. I will not serve that in which I no longer believe, whether it calls itself my home, my fatherland, or my church. And I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use: silence, exile, and cunning. What makes the silence and the words of James Joyce, of William Francis Herlihy, and of Edward Said incredible, crucibles of life and existence, of agony and understanding, is not merely what they achieve in sound and message, about the exclusions and pain and misunderstandings of exile. It's what they do, so outside that limit, beyond description and the elucidation of things lived. Words have the power to create experience for others. I believe in that power and in its capacity to do good. Words can be more important than money and power, and they can bring together ideas with the ability to lower physical things like walls and guns. A few months after that rainy night in Catalonia, I reached out to Edward Said via email. ews1@columbia.edu is still in my Hotmail sent folder. I wanted to meet him, to ask questions, to talk about literature and art, the disruptions of exile, its impact on thought and being and writing and creativity. A cordial note eventually came back from a secretary handling his account. As I clicked, my expectation was to see his words in relation to mine. But I got a gut punch. A critical north, but also a hero in a profession that lacks them. Gone. I regret to inform you that Edward Said passed away on September 25, 2003. This email account is currently being monitored on a limited basis for essential matters. I wonder what Edward Said would think of AI, of Donald Trump, of October 7, of Promesa and Puerto Rico, of Sinn Féin, and the long and slow fall of the House of Paisley. Corkyoke Irish Republican Michael Collins, my father and eldest son's namesake, believed that before insurmountable power and violence, our only weapon is refusal. It is what gives us freedom, not the ultimate freedom that all nations desire, but the freedom to achieve it. 1922. Edward Said refused paralyzed gestures of aestheticized powerlessness in favor of action. But what action? There is much in his words from Dublin in 1999. "I am so grateful to Ireland," he said, "especially for its literary and cultural example. You have had many more years of imperialism than we have, and you have produced a fabulous culture of resistance and an extraordinary spirit, a cultural effort, which I think is much more important than arms and armed struggle." Said envisioned Ireland as a benchmark for decolonization. After the Free State, 1922, came the Republic of Ireland, 1949, and European Union citizenship, 1973. Net emigration would shift to immigration in the 1990s, while divorce and same-sex unions were legalized, 1996 and 2015. The Good Friday Agreement, 1998, effectively ended the Troubles. Today, Ireland has excellent public health care, free higher education, very little crime, and no right to bear arms. Do Dublin, Derry, and Cork have a case vis-a-vis Boston, London, and Zurich to experience something like what Michael Collins imagined? Would James Joyce return? Dienta na firina, caith mi amras a bheith orm fi sin. Perhaps a homecoming would be marked by car accidents and distraction. Albeit incomplete, Ireland's decolonization has changed things in the diaspora too. While our family life in Massachusetts once deflected any mention of Ireland, after all, we are Americans now, right? Saoránacht Éireannach has been reclaimed in a new generation. In this, Said saw not just an Irish triumph, but a decolonial template for places like Puerto Rico, Palestine, Catalonia, Xinjiang, Basque Country, or Western Sahara. Edward Said asks the colonized and the colonizer to take each other seriously. He believed in the power of culture and experience, and promoted music and language as bridges. What Said recognized about Ireland, cultural gifts, intellectual leaders, committed people, are applicable beyond a single colonized island, because they are human strengths, repeatable in example. Are lost causes the only ones worth fighting for? Long before I thought about the strange, irrational links between privilege, empire, talent, exclusion, and opportunity, as a boy on Martha's Vineyard and Cape Cod, I could sense how the whims of summer people, some are not, as the Eel Pond Bridge graffiti says, overwhelm the needs of townies, needs like affordable food, housing. Soccer, I thought, was a method to connect to them, a cultural effort for them to take me seriously, or at least to make a conversation possible. My commitment to their sport, football would become my own, didn't achieve much for townies in Falmouth, Mashpee, or Oak Bluffs, but lost causes can be worthwhile. Soccer and music and words are gestures that can embody a vision for a future with shared parts. There is an integrity to this when it fails. Shared cultural passions may not challenge injustice, but they can make mutual experience possible. After moving from Montevideo to New Jersey at age 11, Tab Ramos said soccer was my friend.
He fought, lived, and communicated through the game. And for young people, that symbolism can express complexities and layers of meaning beyond the comprehension of adults and their governments. Many believe that in places like Derry, New Jersey, and Al-Quds Asharkiya, the real border is in people's minds.
At the moment that they were playing, said Saeed, of the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, their personal identities and histories sort of dropped away. They became sort of irrelevant. What's relevant is what they are doing towards you. A few years ago, the Modern Language Association had an Edward Said retrospective. I mostly listened in silence, hoping that Said's memory would alleviate the politics and tensions of the day. My question for the panel was about Said as a person, as a colleague, and as a friend. What struck me about Bruce Robbins' response was how his voice faltered as he began to speak. Those are important moments. Having dedicated much of my life to teaching, writing, and thinking about the organizational power, the emotional charge, and the restorative and revelatory capacity of words, to say nothing of their misunderstandings, sometimes what surrounds them, a pause, a stutter, a gasp, can outline part of the enormity that lies beyond language and its narratives. If exile is feeling like you are outside a narrative, words can create experiences with depths to replenish part of that emptiness. But the emptiness of exile is part of a design. Worlds are planned. People in them are excluded. As Western governments create new forms of exile, Said's understanding of that fact is yet a rudder. We should strive, even if it is a lost cause, to undo exclusion through democratic participation and forms of citizenship that diverge from the old ways, the ways that have commitments to borders instead of people. Maybe words can do that much. This article was commissioned by Ben Platt.
Morgan Berry presents exile as a psychological condition, a hollowness that persists even when the displaced person finds success in a new land. There is a specific kind of weight in the 7 words Berry's grandfather used to dismiss his Irish past, suggesting that the unhealable rift Edward Said wrote about is often maintained through deliberate silence. It's a meditation on the internal scars of moving between worlds and the ways language is used to navigate that loss. The interesting thing is how that same rift manifests in Anant Gupta's reporting, not as a poetic silence, but as a bureaucratic deletion. Where Berry looks at the choice to leave, Gupta follows Anil Hossain, a scholar who found himself physically present in his village in West Bengal, but legally erased from its voter rolls. It is a jarring transition. Berry's grandfather chose not to go back, while Hossain is told he doesn't belong exactly where he stands. Gupta's account moves the conversation from the emotional impossibility of return to the very literal hierarchical citizenship created by a clerical purge. Read alongside Berry, the unsettling alienation Hossain feels on election day starts to look like the administrative version of the despair Berry describes in that rainy Barcelona library. The state, it seems, has its own way of enforcing the silence that Berry's grandfather carried by choice.
For years, anthropologist Adil Hossain has studied the politics of citizenship and written extensively about the subject. But the special intensive revision of voter rolls in West Bengal made the 39-year-old scholar's own life what he calls a laboratory of citizenship. Despite possessing a passport and land records dating back to the 1950s, Hossain's name was removed from the electoral roll of his village in the Uttar Dinajpur district of West Bengal, weeks ahead of the assembly elections. On April 23rd, the day of the vote in his constituency, his parents and his sister went to the polling booth, while he had to stay at home. All of a sudden, it dawned on me that the things I have read about are happening to me now, said Hossain, who teaches at a private university in India. It was very unsettling. I felt a sense of alienation. This is hierarchical citizenship. Others could go and vote, but I could not. The special intensive revision removed over 91 lakh names from the voter list of Bengal. This figure nearly matched the Bharatiya Janata Party's claims that there were 1 crore Bangladeshis, Rohingyas, on the electoral rolls of the state. The Election Commission, though, has not disclosed how many foreigners, if any, it identified through the exercise. Many of the names that it purged from the rolls were removed because of spelling errors. At least 34 lakh deleted voters have filed appeals before tribunals set up by the Supreme Court. Hossain is one of them. Since the BJP came to power in the state on May 9th, the new administration has taken a series of decisions that render deleted voters ineligible for welfare schemes. Some of these decisions have put deleted voters in the dock, even as the tribunals have yet to hear their appeals and decide their fate. I had a sense of foreboding about what the BJP, would do, Hossain said. Historically, he noted, such processes do not end with one step. The SIR snatched away the right to vote. The next step is taking away social welfare benefits, he alleged. He is now preparing to legally challenge one such controversial order passed by the new government. On May 14th, it had instructed officials to verify all the 1.69 crore caste certificates issued during the 15-year reign of the Mamata Banerjee-led Trinamool Congress in the state. The order, of which Scroll has seen a copy, stated that the caste certificates of deleted voters shall be examined and may be cancelled.
Hossain contended that any such move would be unconstitutional. The SIR was carried out to draw up a list of the electorate, he explained. To link it with social welfare benefits is to create new categories of citizenship. This is how people are slowly pushed to the margins. Hossain argued that till the tribunal decides all appeals, the lives of deleted voters should not be impacted. His own appeal, which he filed over 2 months ago, has yet to be heard. He estimated that the tribunals could take 8 to 10 years to dispense with all the appeals. More legal challenges. The scholar is hardly the only one petitioning the Calcutta High Court against the new government's use of the roll revision exercise as the basis for administrative action. On June 19th, the Communist Party of India, Marxist-Leninist Liberation, had also filed a public interest litigation suit against the same order. In a press statement, the party said that linking the inclusion or exclusion of a person's name in the SIR to the verification of caste certificates is wholly illegal and without constitutional basis. Separately, Isha Khan Chowdhury, the MP from Maldaha Dakshin, has filed a petition seeking information about the status of pending appeals and asking for the process to be expedited. Nobody knows what is going on, the Congress leader complained. The process has completely slowed down. One top judge has resigned out of frustration. After the recent split in the Lok Sabha contingent of the Trinamool Congress, Chowdhury is the only remaining opposition MP from the Muslim-majority districts of Malda and Murshidabad, which saw high deletions during the special intensive revision. He asked for more judges to be appointed for deciding the appeals of deleted voters. They can't drag this on, he said. They are playing with people's lives. Living in terror. Deleted voters whom Scroll met while covering the West Bengal Assembly elections echoed Chowdhury. Wasip Biswas, 32, runs a construction business in the border village of Devipur in Murshidabad district. His elder brother works in the border security force. Both their names were struck off the rolls before the elections, even though they possess land documents from over a century ago. There is no update about our appeals, Biswas grumbled over the phone. I am hearing that our driving licenses will be cancelled and we will not get ration. People are living in terror. Biswas mentioned the case of 12 deleted voters from Malda about whom there was constant discussion in his village. They were allegedly declared to be Bangladeshis and put in a holding center after the elections. They are all Muslims from one family, he claimed. Meanwhile, civil society protests for disenfranchised voters have more or less wound up in Kolkata. Qazi Mohammed Alfred, a professor who actively took part in one such sit-in demonstration at the city's Park Circus Maidan for 2 months till May, was candid when asked about this. We are not sitting there anymore, he admitted. It is unlikely that the new government will listen to us. One of our fellow protesters was even arrested by the police. Alfred suggested that it had become risky to protest in the state. All activists have to think a lot before doing anything now, he explained. But Hossain, the anthropologist, was unfazed. He said he would go ahead with his petition against the government's order regarding the verification of caste certificates because he was convinced that the Constitution was on his side. While Hossain belongs to an other backward class community, he claimed that his case did not stem from the need to safeguard personal interests. He pointed out that he worked at a private university and had not availed reservations for other backward classes in his career so far. I am very privileged, he acknowledged. I have traveled the world. I have a degree from Oxford. I never thought this would happen to me.
The rule revision showed that exclusionary processes can affect even privileged Muslims, he said. We are in limbo. We don't know what kind of rules they will make for people who have no voting rights, he added. This is slow poisoning.
The ache of a lost homeland often feels like a private haunting, a quiet struggle to find words for a place that doesn't exist anymore. But that internal fracture turns sharp and public when it meets the cold ink of a government list. What lingers is how the unhealable rift of exile finds a twin in the discovery that a name's been scrubbed from a polling roster, a second displacement. If the law can erase a person's presence as easily as a typo, what actually keeps someone tethered to the place they call home?